Good morning. Did you ever do anything stupid?
Did you ask if I ever done something stupid? Can I answer for you?
Yes. When I graduated from high school back in the Stone Age, I got a job at Mobile Chemical, which was today called Pactiv. And I have a picture of me about that time with hair down to here. And I was smoking dope every day and drinking. And my father came to me and he said, you're going nowhere. Why don't you cut your hair and come with me into the real estate business, and you'll do a lot better in life. So begrudgingly, I cut my hair off and spiced myself up and went to selling real estate. He had 3 offices in those days, one in Victor, one here in Canandaigua, and one in Bloomfield. And I did very well. I had a 2-year-old Cadillac that I paid cash for. I bought a house on Honeyoil Lake on the West Lake Road, level lakefront. And I made more money that year, this was 1974, I made more money that year than my high school teachers did. And I had basically flunked out of school. But the problem was, I spent every single penny. I thought I made a big profit on the house on the lake. I bought it for $13,000, sold it for $21,000. Ooh, a lot of money. Well, that was a lot of money back in those days, but I spent all my money very foolishly, and if I had put that money away and invested it, I'd probably be a rich guy today, but instead I squandered every penny of it, which is too bad. And I really wish that somebody had told me the things that I'm about to tell you, but nobody did. So I'm speaking predominantly to the younger people today. And if you've made some mistakes, and I ask you to look at this not as a condemnation for some mistake you made in the past, but to understand that, maybe you might have wished somebody had told you this stuff yourself. And the other thing I'd like to say before I start, it's never too late to make a change and to start a new day, which is what Christianity is all about. So the first slide I want to talk about is what we talked about last week, just by way of review. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do his commandments, and his praise endures forever. So if we're going to start doing things that are wise, then we really have to have a fear of God and an understanding that God is a disciplinarian and he also is a loving God. So I just wanted to say that as a preface. Next slide. Do not boast about tomorrow. You do not know what a day may bring forth. Being in the fire department here in Cheshire, there could be a call this afternoon, and we could go down to one of these intersections in the town of Canandaigua, and there could be somebody dead in a car. And I'm sure that those people did not think that when they got up this morning. And so we see this all the time, and even in my own life, I've had a couple really close calls where, had it not been for a little second or two, I might have been killed in a car wreck on 2 occasions in my life as well. So we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, the scripture says. If you look back at history, there are all kinds of things. There are wars, there are famines, there are pestilences. There are a lot of things that have happened and will continue to happen. I think that COVID was kind of a wake-up call for us. I was born in 1955, which was the year that they actually started immunizing people for polio. And there was a kid in the class ahead of me, he was a year older, and he actually had polio and couldn't walk. And I used to remember as a little kid seeing crippled people that had been crippled by polio. Well, it's been changed. And we live in a time really of great prosperity. It's really much more prosperous today than it was, even 20, 30 years ago, although maybe the young people don't believe that. And so it says, don't boast yourself about tomorrow because you don't know what a day might bring forth. Now, our lesson today is from Genesis chapter 41 and beginning in verse 17. And this is a prehistoric story about Joseph. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the banks of the Nile." Now Joseph, for those who may not be familiar with his story, he was the favorite son of Israel. And he was the first son of his favorite wife. He had 4 wives. Imagine what the problems in the family would be like in a situation like that. But he liked Rachel the best, and Joseph was the firstborn from Rachel. And his father was obviously in favor of Joseph. And so he gave Joseph a multicolored coat. And Joseph had a dream, and he dreamt that all his brothers came and bowed down to him. And he made the mistake of telling his brothers that. And they were already upset with him because he was getting the favor from the father. And so, this is just a little background to the story today. His brothers decided that let's kill him. And then the oldest son said, no, let's not kill him. Let's just sell him into slavery. So they kidnapped him, and they took the multicolored coat off of him, and they put blood, not human blood, but animal blood on the coat. They threw him in a pit, and they sold him into slavery, and ultimately he ended up being in Egypt. And then they took the coat back to the father and said, is this your son's coat? So they did the most ruthless thing to this young man, and they did a terrible thing to his father and their father by selling him into Egypt as a slave. And there's a lot to this story, but after he was there for many, many years, he became known as a spiritual person. And he had a reputation of being able to interpret dreams. And he had a reputation for being an honest person, and a person who would not be condemned by temptation. In fact, in one place, the wife of one of the leaders in Egypt had come on to him, and he got away from her, and then she lied about him and had him thrown into prison. And so he had a terrible life in a lot of ways. But he had interpreted some dreams. He had a reputation for being able to prophesy things that are coming, and people began to take notice. Hey, when this guy says God said this, they began to take notice that those things actually began to happen. And so at this juncture in our story, Pharaoh the king of Egypt has had a dream, which is a twofold dream, and he didn't know how to interpret the dream. And so he called all his magicians and the different soothsayers and the people, the priests of Ra and whoever it was there in Egypt who was thought to be a wise man or a wise woman, and they couldn't interpret the dream. And then finally somebody said, hey, this guy Joseph, he can probably tell you what it means. And so Pharaoh calls Joseph, and that's where we find ourselves in the story. Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. I tried to find a picture of me standing by the banks of the Nile. I have one. And I was on the other end of the Nile. And I can't tell you how majestic the Nile is. It comes from Lake Victoria, and it used to come over Victoria Falls in Uganda. Yeah, but they've dammed it up now so that the falls have disappeared because the falls are underwater now because they're using the water for electric. But it's much bigger than the Niagara River. I mean, when you're there by Niagara Falls and you can look across to the other side, and the rapids where it's roaring, it's like that only times 2 at the source of the Nile. So I was on the other end of it. They say that it takes 3 months for the water to get from the source of the Nile to the Mediterranean. So while I was there, I spit in it so that I could, 3 months later, remember, yeah, it's just getting to the Mediterranean. That's how long it takes to get, that's how big that river is, how long it takes to get to the Mediterranean. And the thing about the Nile in those days, there were no dams on the river in those days. And every spring, the delta of the Nile, which is represented here, would flood, and it would be, very fertile soil. And so it was just a great place to live in those early days. And so Pharaoh sees this dream. He's standing on the banks of the Nile. Next slide, please. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile, and 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows came up after them, poor, very ugly, and thin. Never I'd seen such ugly ones in all the land of Egypt." Help lifting, no big deal, Crystal. They can take care of that. The thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had done so, for they were still as ugly as before. Then I awoke. And I fell asleep a second time. And I saw in my dream 7 ears of grain full of good and growing on one stalk. Now, I used AI to try to get a picture of a 7-eared stalk of corn. And AI informed me corn stalks only have 2 ears, which of course I knew because we grow corn every year. But I thought maybe I could get AI to make one for me, but I couldn't. It's not that advanced yet. So here he sees a second depiction of prosperity, not just an ordinary stalk, but a 7-eared stalk, and it's just beautiful food. And then he sees 7 withered, thin, blighted by the east wind sprouting, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. So the Pharaoh, the king, is relating this story to Joseph, and he's expecting Joseph to interpret it for him and to come up with an answer. What does it mean? Notice it says the east wind. Prevailing winds are different depending on where you are on the earth. And I thought, east wind. Well, we know what happens when we get an east wind, especially in the winter. It's coming up off of the Atlantic and it's spinning around through the hills of New York, and it comes down here and it dumps a foot of snow on us. It's called a nor'easter because our winds are prevailing west winds. And so I thought, I wonder what kind of winds there are in Egypt. And so I looked it up, and in Egypt, the winds are prevailing northwest. And the winds bring rain in the winter. And it makes it so that the ground is fertile and you can grow things. But if there's an east wind, it comes from like Saudi Arabia and over there, and it's dry. And so in this vision, it's the east wind comes and it dries everything up, and it brings anti-prosperity. See, there's obviously they weren't watching their fossil fuels, and global dryness is coming. If you look at the aerial maps of North Africa and you look at the Sahara Desert, which is all the way around Egypt except for this spot where the Nile has made it fertile, there are actually riverbeds that they can see. And you look around here and you see the hills and the lakes gouged out by ice. I had ice in my driveway this week. For the last month, we've had this cold weather. We get a half a foot of snow, and then it would melt, and it would melt on the driveway, and it turn into ice, and then we get more snow on top of it, and then it would melt, and it would turn into ice again. It happened 3 times. So I actually had a glacier in my driveway. And if you were here a couple of weeks ago, we had ice here that was very difficult to get in and out. And so we know that the earth is warming because if there used to be glaciers here, things have changed. There has been climate change. And if there used to be rivers that ran through northern Africa, there has been climate change there as well. But ordinarily, from this story, ordinarily they would get the regular northwest winds, which would come across the Mediterranean and bring them rain in the winter, and it would allow them to have good crops and to be prosperous. And so Joseph interprets this as 7 good years and 7 bad years. The good cows, they're going to have all kinds of money for 7 years. Everything's going to go well. The banking system is going to work properly. Everything's going to be good, and everybody's going to be prosperous, and they're going to buy snowmobiles and boats and all kinds of stuff like that. But at the end of 7 years, the winds are going to change. And the winds do change periodically. I mean, we have different foul winds. We have the winds of sickness, and we have the winds of, lack of money sometimes. We have the winds of prosperity. And so Joseph interprets this in this way. Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Who's changed the winds? God has changed the winds. But he has not left the people without knowledge. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good years are 7 years. The dreams are 1. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and they are 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. We don't know anything about famine, really. I mean, even in the tough times of the Great Depression in this area, people were able to live. My grandfather, let me just say that my mother told me that she never had anything to eat that wasn't wild game when she grew up. She was born in 1931, at the height of the Depression. Yeah, they would have their garden. He would hunt for food. They would can their food, and they survived by the skin of their teeth. What would happen today? For instance, I've been doing a little reading on this tariff situation with Canada. Have you been keeping up on that? And one of the things that I read is they said, the Canadians have said, okay, you're going to put tariffs on us. We're going to put tariffs on electricity. And I thought, oh no, who's getting the Canadian electricity? Guess who it is? It's us. It's Buffalo and Western New York. They've got more electricity than we do. I mean, it comes from Niagara Falls. We've got one half of the river, and they've got the other half of the river. And I don't know if you know this, but if you go to Niagara Falls, really only about half the water is coming over the falls. It's being sucked off up above on the Niagara River, and it's going down canals on both sides, and it's running through the generators and dumping below Niagara Falls. And so if they put a 25% tariff on that, who's going to pay for that? And if, God forbid, we got into a war with somebody and they dropped a bomb on the Gunay nuclear power facility and they cut off the electricity, what would we do? Or if we're, say, completely and totally dependent on foreign oil, and they say, I'm old enough to remember the Arab embargo. Some of us ancient people, I see Julie is shaking her head. And, those of us who remember the early 70s when there were gas lines and you could only get gas every other day and stuff like that. What would happen if they turned that off and we were not producing as a country enough oil for ourselves? I couldn't even looked up on the internet to see which way the wind blows in Egypt without electricity. So to me, it's really, really kind of crazy to make everything electric. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but if everything is in one basket, it's kind of a dangerous situation. As a nation, and it's also in our own lives, a dangerous situation. Next slide, please. Amos 3:7. Surely the Lord does nothing unless he reveals his secret counsel to his servants, the prophets. So God is, even though he's bringing an ill wind, he is revealing the way of salvation through his prophet, Joseph. But we have to listen to the prophet. Next slide. It is, as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to the Pharaoh what he's about to do. There'll be 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. There will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will consume the land. And the plenty will no longer be known in the land because the famine will follow, and it will be very grievous. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will surely bring it about. So God is taking responsibility for this coming disaster. But it is 7 years out, and there is a way to avoid starving to death during that time, and that is to save. The slide that says wisdom is acting on the revelation and knowledge. Therefore, let Pharaoh select a man who's discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers in the land and take 1/5, that's 20% for those of you who can't do math, of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plenteous years. And let them spend every last cent. In addition, let them borrow from their enemies against the future for 35 or 50 years and let your children pay the debt off. And don't worry about it. You'll be dead by then. Oh, wait a minute. Doesn't it say that? That's not what it says. The Proverbs tell us that the borrower is the slave of the lender. And show me somebody that is in debt up to their eyebrows, and I'll show you somebody that can't sleep at night and has an upset stomach all the time. Let's see what it really says on the next slide. Let them gather the food of these good years that are coming and lay up under the authority of Pharaoh the food in the cities, and let them keep it. And the food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine. We have we store oil like this, but I guess, they released all the oil here a year or two ago because the prices were so high. The strategic oil reserve we have. And of course, we couldn't go on if we didn't have oil, but we certainly couldn't go on if we don't have food. And so the solution is big government in this case. Let them tax 20%. How much are you taxed? More than 20% for sure. I mean, almost everybody in this room is probably being taxed at least 35% when you figure it all out, but between your state income tax and your federal income tax and your sales tax and your car registrations and the other government mandates that you have to have, they really have control of all the money. That wasn't the case in Egypt, but here they took the money not to squander it on foreign aid, but to preserve the lives of the people in their own place for the coming thing in 7 years. Now, is something bad going to happen in 7 years? Let me put it this way. If you're budgeting your money and you own a car, it is going to break down. You don't know when, but it is going to break down. And I have a Jeep, and so I know that it's going to cost $900. You know, whatever it is, it's $900. And I'm going to have to pay $900 at least. I have an old car. I don't make any car payment because I pay cash for my cars because I don't want to pay the bank. And so I have these old cars, and I know that I'm going to have like 2 car payments a year of $900, and then I'm going to be able to drive the car. I don't have to pay $900 every month because I have an old car. But when I'm budgeting, if I look at my bank account and I say, well, hey, I've got an extra $900. Let's go on vacation. Have I ever done that?
No.
We can't do that because there are 7 years coming that we have to prepare for. Joseph gives Pharaoh a 7-year financial plan. Not just thinking how to get through this year, not thinking just how to get through next year, but how to get to the 14-year financial plan. 7 good years and 7 bad years, but you have to be ready for the bad years. And you have to take the good years and make ready for the bad years. And so just because your bank account shows you have an extra $1,800 in there, you have to remember that, you know, the insurance bill is coming up soon and the repair will eventually come up. And so you can't spend it on something else. Even though our government thinks that, you know, they run our government in a way unlike that, but a Christian should be thinking about preparing themselves. Do you remember when you couldn't get any toilet paper? I was walking through Runnings when the toilet paper crisis was going on, and there was in the hunting section, they had little packages of toilet paper, and it said Bob's Wipes on it. And there was like 2 or 3 little teeny packages of Bob's Wipe. And so I put a picture of Bob's Wipes up on my Facebook page, and my friend Bob from Germany sent me a Facebook message, and he said, "Can you please send those to me?" You know, it's a lot cheaper to buy toilet paper if you buy the big. If you go and you buy one thing of toilet paper because you need some toilet paper, it really costs at least twice. But what if you don't have the money to buy the big thing of toilet paper? The reason you don't have the money to buy the big thing of toilet paper is because you haven't planned. And you paid for something else beside the toilet paper. Now, I didn't know this stuff, so, you know, these are things that I've learned in my old age. I didn't know this kind of stuff when I was middle-aged. We do the best we can. We try to buy stuff in bulk, and we didn't have any problem with toilet paper. In fact, we even got like 3 extra toilet papers on Halloween. We walked through the town, and, you know, kids had thrown the stuff in the trees, and some of it fell on the ground. I picked it up and took it home because it's free toilet paper, even though I had toilet paper. We had everything we need. But we didn't get there we got there by 1,000 smaller decisions previously. I can remember when I said this before, but I can remember when we first came here, which was 35 years ago, we basically were in debt up to here. And we figured out that it was because we were paying interest to everybody and their brother. There's two kinds of people in the world. There's those that pay interest and those who receive interest. And we didn't figure that out until too late. But you have to make a decision not to live beyond your means. And the seven famine years are going to come in one form or another in our individual lives. And so we should try to be prepared for it. And we should try to buy things that are enduring in value. You know, I don't think you can go wrong buying a house. I mean, you know, maybe you can. Maybe it'll fall back. I don't know. Maybe the prices will come back down. But when I started in the real estate business in 1974, you could buy a house in Victor for $22,000. And the same house today is over $300,000, the exact same house. So buying a house is one thing, you know, it's an appreciating value, but if you buy a Lincoln, you know, if you bought a Lincoln in 1974 and it'd be gone for 30 years already, all rotted out in the junkyard and melted down in China and made into girders that are going to come back with a 20% tariff on them. Appoint somebody, you know, this is advice for the government here, but it's also advice for individuals to plan ahead. You know, the Mormons have a good thought. They I don't know how long. Maybe you can tell me, how long do they plan for in their food supply? 7? Yeah, it probably comes from this passage. I remember that somebody down the road here, their parents are Mormons, and when the parents died, they went to look at the food supply, and all the cans were expired. I suppose if you're going to do that, then you got to rotate, you know, eat the old ones and rotate the new ones in. So the kids weren't helped by that inheritance. They were actually hurt by it. But if there had been a problem, there would have been food for their family. And we should think about that a little bit. You say, well, I can't afford to do that because I'm on a fixed income. Somewhere along the line, whatever your income is, you should always put something aside. Even if it's just a little bit. And that should be used to make a little bit more. It's a side hustle, they call it today. What's your side hustle? Sean and I have a little side hustle. We have a rental house. And we bought it in 1987 or something. It's been paid off for years, and every single month that check comes in from that tenant. And several times the tenants have said, we want to buy this house. And why would I sell you this house? If I sell you the house, the money that I'm making in 3 years, if I sell it to you, after 3 years, you'll be ahead and I'll be behind. So it's a little side hustle, so that helps out in our daily lives. Put somebody in charge, it says. Let them gather the food. The food reserve, and the proposal pleased the Pharaoh. Now what's up? What's with this egg shortage thing? You've been following that? Actually, Sean won't read the news anymore. I'm loving the news right now. Why don't we have any eggs? You think it has something to do with killing them all? They're killing all the chickens? They killed millions of chickens. Yeah. I don't want the bird flu either, but I think we may have gone a little overboard on that. I think they killed chickens that had no exposure to the bird flu. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. If we go all electric, we could really be in trouble. Because if they turn it off, we have in our house emergency heat. Now, we heat with propane, and if the electric goes out, we can't heat with the propane because it works on a fan, and the thing fires with electricity. But we've got these fireplaces also, and we can turn those on, and it would be good for a bit. But if we can't get propane, we have an electric stove in our kitchen, but in our back room we have a propane stove. So we'll be okay short term for stuff like that. But what happens if we can't get propane? And who owns the propane that we get? I'll give you a little clue. Canada. Superior. They bought Burnwell and Phelps and what's the other? Agway and what's the other one that used to be up by the airport? Superior is the overall, what is it? Griffith. They own all of those. Yes. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know who owns that company, but they own all the ones that we just mentioned. And so if you call and say, I want a cheaper price, they go, and they give you the same price as the other one. We have Hometown Energy, which is a different company. But where does the propane come from? It comes from Canada. And what's Canada just said? We're going to put a 25% tariff on the propane. We're going to put a 25% tariff on the electricity. We'll fix Trump. He wants to put a tariff on us. We'll put a tariff on them. So I do have auxiliary heat, but if I can't get propane, what am I going to do? You know, my brother has, he has the best kind of heat. He has a wood stove, and he has wood. A wood stove wouldn't do me much good because I don't have any wood, but he has wood, and it's way over there in Livingston County. You wouldn't invest, say if you worked at Kodak, you wouldn't invest all of your retirement in Kodak stock, would you? I mean, what's Kodak stock worth today? $6, what was it worth? Back when you were working there, $6. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to have a couple sources of income, and you want to have some backups. If the power goes out, I'm backed up, but when the 6 gallons of gasoline, or actually I have 6 gallons of gasoline, I have 30 gallons of gasoline, but that's only 30 days. And if the power goes out more than 30 days, there's nothing I can do. So it would be wise for make plans, and it would be wise for our government to drill, and it would be wise for us to be sufficient in electricity, and it would be wise for us to think ahead and to have something laid aside for when the car breaks. That's wisdom. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find anyone else like this guy? He's got the Holy Spirit. There's nobody better for this job than Musk. He's the Musk of his time period. He's in charge. He knows what's about to happen, and he knows what the solution is, and that is to be prepared. And so he puts Joseph in charge of all of this stuff, and he saves the people of Egypt from their 7-year famine. In Ecclesiastes it says, divide your portion to 7, not one basket, even to 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth. Jesus said the same thing. I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when, not if, when it fails, they will receive you into their eternal dwellings. So what does that mean? Jesus says we need to be taking care of each other as a community. And when tough time comes, having a friend is really a good situation. So we shouldn't be, individualists to the point where we don't need anybody else, but we need each other, and we need to understand that the money could fail. What's backing it? You know, there's a big thing in the news now. Is there any gold in Fort Knox? They've been saying for years there isn't. I think there probably is, but it probably belongs to somebody else. They're probably just storing it for somebody. I don't know. But all the gold in the world doesn't amount to the money in the world. All the gold in the world doesn't even amount to the money of, say, the big corporations of America. We should be prepared. It could. Have you ever seen the pictures in Germany after the war? The United States said to Germany, "You will repay this debt for this war." And so they went to the printing press. I had a bill that I gave to my son Amos that it was 3 million marks. And, you know, they had to take, 45 million marks to buy a loaf of bread. Okay, you want to be paid back? We'll print it. We can't trust the money, but we can trust the prophet. And the prophet says, save and prepare yourself. Now, I went over a little bit, but I will take a few comments before we go. Anybody? Up here first.
Thanks. I just struggle between being prepared and if you have a second coat, give it to someone else, and that he's going to provide for you just like the raven always has food. Like all of our missionaries, like they can't sit there and save because they're spending all their time and energy, spreading the word for God. So how do you make sense of the two of those things?
Well, we're paying for those missionaries, aren't we?
Correct. But
honestly tell you that our son Andrew,
Microphone.
Our son Andrew and Chingte, even though they are missionaries, he has continued to save money and put it aside.
Back here with Crystal.
Got to tell you, all the way through this, my husband's been nudging me.
He's been telling you the stuff right along, and you just haven't listened, huh?
We listened to a lot of it. Said about the pantry. Oh my gosh. Anyway, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Everybody can budget. It's not easy. It involves sacrifice. But the reward far exceeds what you can even imagine when you're putting money away and things are paid off. So I want to encourage everybody, you can do it.
You can get there.
And in that, be faithful in giving to God. And you will be blessed. You will be amazed. And I can tell you that from experience. You think you can't, turn it over to God, trust in God, follow God's plan, and you'll be blessed. But it's work. You have to have faith, you have to have discipline, but I want to encourage everyone to do it.
It's nice to not have to worry. I can remember when we were first, we have 7 kids, so it was expensive way to grow, to be in a family with not much salary. But I can remember having to go to the bank and borrow money to pay my property taxes. And now, I hate paying them, and they're a lot more than they were then, but they're paid. But it's because I didn't spend it on things I shouldn't have.
So I think it comes down to our difficulty in defining wants and needs, right? So even when you look at these historical, biblical expressions of percentages, right? 1/7 or 1/5 or 1/10, 10%, 20%, 20, it's confusing. And so we get confused when we think we need something. The reality, I think, is when you look even at this story, if you take 20% for 7 years, the people are living on 80% those 7 years, and now they're expected to live on 20% for the next 7 years? I mean, that's the math, right? So what that tells us is they were still well beyond their wants when they had the 80% to live on.
The starving cows ate the ones and still looked just as bad.
Exactly right. And so the 20% that was saved up and then expended over the next 7 years means that at least their basic need for survival was 20% of what they were experiencing in the prosperous years. Now, I struggle with we convince ourselves that those things that we want are those things that we need. But if we lived without it for this long, do we really? And isn't need defined as that which is required for survival? So, and I do agree with Keith, if you understand that you need to acknowledge God first in your life, and you need to make sure that you're giving, and we call it tithe, the 10%, that you're doing that, He'll take care of your other needs. But you need to put that first before you start worrying about some of the other
Without
needs.
neglecting the other, though.
You can't neglect the other, and you can't be lazy, and you can't be totally gratified all the time. That whole delayed gratification thing is tough on us. We don't like that. So I don't know. I spent years working and putting my first 10 years of my professional job, I didn't save anything. I mean, I thought I was living paycheck to paycheck. I was spending everything I got, right? Every week I'd spend the paycheck. And it wasn't until later that I realized that I was actually spending on things that I didn't need. And I was able to start, like Keith said, put a little back, budget it, delay to the gratification, and get to a point.
If you can make that savings pay you, that's where it really helps long term. Because you start getting, exponential return on it. Anyone else? I know we went over 10 minutes, but I think it was worth it, wasn't it? God bless you. Oh, you got your hand up, Julie? Or this is not an auction. You're just getting ready to leave? Yeah. Okay. Have a good one. Bless you all.